Welcome to Ride Success, the podcast that takes you on a learning journey to a more productive, creative, and active life. In the podcast, I explore cycling's global trends, community needs, business strategies, and the journeys of remarkable individuals in the world of cycling. Today, I'm excited to introduce Jack Thompson, aka Jack Ultra Cyclist, a celebrated figure in the ultra cycling community known for his incredible endurance and record-setting achievements. Jack has distinguished himself with several notable accomplishments, but all of these are with one purpose: to raise awareness for mental health. So, in chronological order, let me list a few of his achievements. In 2018, he completed 4 sequential climbs of Taiwan's KOM, covering 720 kilometers and climbing 13,600 meters in just 56 hours. In 2019, he completed 3 Everestings in 3 days across 3 different countries. In 2020, he set a Guinness World Record for the most kilometers ridden in 7 days, covering 3,505 kilometers. In 2021, he completed the Tour de France route in just 10 days, overtaking the professional peloton. In 2022, he undertook the Space Odyssey project, where he climbed 1 million meters in 1 year. And finally, in 2023, he knocked 5 hours of the existing time of the Munda BD Trail in Australia to claim his 7th world record, with a time of just 2 days, 12 hours and 15 minutes, with just 17 minutes of sleep. This is quite the list. So, join me in this learning journey as I explore how Jack harnesses his extraordinary endurance capabilities to not only break records, but also inspire cyclists around the world to push their limits and pursue their passions. But before we get into the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, please remember to follow and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to, and leave us a review. It helps me to grow the podcast massively, and I'll be forever grateful. Now, back to the podcast. Welcome, Jack, to Ride Success. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to having a chat.
Brilliant. I have been following you for quite a few years now, and I've always been in awe of the challenges that you set yourself, and I find them very inspiring. And I wanted to have this conversation. I wanted to bring you into the podcast because I think there is a lot of lessons that people can learn through the story that you have to tell, through the transformational journey that you have been through. And that's particular because through your story, you have demonstrated that how remarkable your resilience and as well your ability to transform your personal struggles into inspiring achievements, and that allows people then to look and feel inspired by what you have done, and also kind of this journey that you are in is also changing your life. So for the people that don't know you very well, I wanted to kind of allow you to tell you a bit more about your story, because you have transitioned from personal struggles that involved alcohol abuse, drug addiction, and kind of you found solace in cycling, which is quite remarkable. So I wanted to allow you to share a little bit about your story, how that happened, and kind of where the pivotal moment where you saw actually cycling is more than a sport, is kind of a lifeline.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit. First things first, I'll give the listeners a bit of a rundown on who I am, what I do. So I'm a professional cyclist, but I do things a little bit differently in that I don't actually race. I'm not part of a professional racing team as such. I'm an individual, and I'm lucky enough to make a living out of cycling without actually racing. So the question probably is, so how do you do that? So what I've managed to do over the last few years is transition from a guy that does really long, crazy distances on a bike. And I've basically created a job out of riding long distances on a bike. So then let's wind back the clock and sort of explain how this all happened.
Yeah.
So growing up, I noticed from quite a young age, around 13, that I wasn't happy and didn't really know why. And my parents said, look, you think you need to go and chat with a psychologist. I developed some interesting tics, and they were kind of taking control of me. In my mind, if I wasn't doing these certain little things, for example, winking one eye or, these kind of, tics, I was convinced that something bad was going to happen. And so I went and spoke with a psychologist, and the psychologist said, look, you're suffering from depression and you've also got an obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So this is when I was 13. So I'm a pretty young
that's quite
guy.
young. Yeah.
Yeah. And didn't really know what to think of it because no one around me talked about depression. I didn't know anyone that was depressed. And I kind of, I didn't know what to think of it. Was it good? Was it bad? It was just what it was. Around that time, my brother wanted a bike for Christmas. And being a jealous older brother, I said, well, if he's going to get a bike, then I want a bike as well. So woke up Christmas morning and there was a bike waiting for me. Santa had brought me a bike. And I started riding. I was actually doing triathlon to begin with. And what I found was that my mood picked up and these obsessive tendencies kind of slid away. They weren't as bad as what they were. Mm-hmm. I was actually seeing a psychologist once a week for a couple of years. So it was, a combination of the cycling and the psychology. But it was this sport that basically gave me a focus. And I didn't enjoy school. I didn't enjoy sitting in a classroom. I struggled to concentrate, and I'll touch on that later on in the discussion. But I found solace in being on a bike. And I went through school, I struggled through it, got pretty good grades. I worked really hard. And when I got to my final year, I said, look, I'm going to give away this cycling business and I'm going to concentrate on studies because I wanted to go to university. So gave it away. And almost, I say overnight, it was probably over the course of a week, I noticed that my mood changed and I started to develop these tics that I hadn't had for 3 or 4 years. And anyway, I went through that final year of school, got into university, was sort of not in the best headspace. I actually studied construction management and economics at university because the careers advisor figured if I liked woodwork at school, I was going to be a good construction manager. Go figure. I didn't really enjoy that field of study. I enjoyed being around a bunch of good guys. It was predominantly guys at the time doing the course. But what I found was that I was going out a lot. I was partying pretty hard. And this is where my obsessive personality sort of got the better of me. I was drinking, and drinking got to a point where it sort of wasn't enough. And I started experimenting with party drugs, which sort of it got more and more sort of the drugs escalated week after week, month after month, to a point where I must have been in my final year. I must have just finished university at this stage and I was working full time. And I got home from work one day, still living with my folks, and laid out on my bed was all of basically the drugs that I'd had in my room that I'd been using. And so I was a drug addict. I was a functioning drug addict. I was going to work. I was, making a living. I had a partner at the time, but I was using heavily. And my dad basically pulled me aside and said, look, mate, what the hell are you doing? Like, we don't condone this sort of behavior. We've never condoned it. He basically said to me, if you don't stop, you can fuck off. Those were his words. And family's always been a very important part of my life. I'm still best friends with my dad, my mum, my brother. We've got the tightest knit little family. Yeah. And so I said, all right, I'm going to give it up. And overnight, I just sort of gave away this drug use. And it was at this point that I really spiraled off into the deep end. with withdrawals, with suicidal ideation, with, really quite a negative state of
that's
mind.
quite an yeah.
And I went into rehab. So I went into a rehab institution for a couple of weeks and basically, came out the other side, luckily having not done any damage to myself or, no long-term damage to my own mind. And my dad said to me, look, now that you're out, why don't you start exercising again? And I didn't really want to. At the time, my dad had become a bit of an enemy, and I eventually gave in, got on a bike, and fell in love with it. And the obsessive personality got the better of me again. And 100-kilometer ride became a 200-kilometer ride, became a 300-kilometer ride. I just loved riding long distances, and it kept me, this sense of, I've got a weekly challenge, be it my own challenge. It's something that I'm going to work towards and achieve. And
exactly,
I worked out I didn't really enjoy working. So, and this sounds like a funny thing because I'd say there's a lot of people that don't enjoy working, but because I'd seen how bad life can get, I'd been, I'd asked myself the question, do I want to end my own life? I'd been in a rehab facility with horrible withdrawals, and I kind of said, look, life's too short for me to sit in this office and work if I'm not actually enjoying it. The thing at the time that I enjoyed was riding a bike. And so I basically said to my parents, long story short, I'm going to quit work. It was actually at the end of a long event that I'd done. I said to my dad, look, I'm going to quit work because I don't enjoy it. And I'm going to try and make a living out of riding a bike. And that's kind of what I've done. And it's been a long process. It didn't happen overnight. But essentially, I'm now in a position where I pick these extreme projects each year. And the interesting thing is I pick a project and I use it most of the time to talk about not necessarily my own struggles, but to talk about mental health as a topic.
Yeah, exactly.
To try and remove the stigma attached to it and to get more people talking about it and to demonstrate what's possible when you do suffer from depression. So I still suffer from depression. I still have ups and downs, but I'm able to manage that through exercise and through other things. And I want to, highlight to other people that, what's possible, the power of the mind.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. It gives the kind of shows the relevance that the transformational power that cycling had in your life and continue to have through managing your mental health as well, and it's perhaps has set you in a completely different path to where you could have headed if cycling wasn't part of your life at kind of that pivotal moment earlier on in your in your 20s. Obviously you have been through your challenges, you have been fundraising for mental health charities, you are very vocal about mental health awareness, and you have always is a key point sharing that the importance of mental health and taking care of yourself. What impact do you hope to achieve through these setting yourself these challenges, which climbing 1 million vertical meters, breaking world Guinness records of the most kilometers cycled over a period of a week. There's so many more that I will list in the intro, but so many more challenges that kind of boggles the mind of how is this possible to do. What impact do you hope to achieve, like from the mental health perspective?
At the end of the day, like if I've said, if I can help one person, like change the course of one person's life, then it's like a job well done. What's really fulfilling for me is when I get a message from somebody saying, I've watched this film and it's been really impactful, and it talks to me, or somebody's wife's contacted me and said, look, my husband's going through a really difficult period. He's watched your films and, he's now open to going and talking with a counsellor. it's really quite fulfilling. I think the reason I do the ultra distance cycling and I strive to break the records, there's definitely an aspect of that's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like I almost need to be doing things that are in the headlines in order for the message to actually reach the audience that I want it to reach. If I was just, if I wasn't doing the things that were getting the media attention, then potentially there wouldn't be the eyeballs on the messaging around it to actually make the difference. So there's a selfish side to it in that I like doing it. I like setting a challenge, but then there's also the, the real sort of, I say the brains. It's not real brainy work, but it's like the reason I do it is because I can get coverage in the media, which then allows people around the world to see what I'm doing. Not because I want them to watch what I'm doing athletically, but I want them to see the message that's attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I think there is a very good correlation between the ultra cycling and mental health, because in ultra cycling, correct me if I'm wrong, you face both physical and mental extremes. You put your body and your mind through challenges that push you outside of your comfort zone, make you reflect about how your well-being, and I think perhaps kind of I wanted to have your take on this, because one of the biggest battles that you face is kind of the voice in your head, telling you to stop when you get yourself cycling these massive lengths distances, and you kind of trying to battle the voice in your head, kind of the logical voice in your head saying, no, I have this goal, I want to achieve it. I kind of wanted to can you share a specific instance where you, through a ride, through a challenge, where you felt you had reached your limit, and kind of where you had to really dig deep into your mind to kind of overcome, to push through?
Yeah, it's a really good question for two reasons. I think it's interesting for other people to learn how you get through a difficult time. And it's also an interesting question for me because one of the things I suffer from is a constant noise in my head, not necessarily a voice, but it's like a constant thinking about this, thinking about that, thinking about all the different things. And as of a few weeks ago, I was actually diagnosed with ADHD. So that, for me, explains that. And that's something I'm working through as an aside. But as an example of a really difficult time, so 2022, I set myself this year-long challenge to climb 1 million vertical meters in a year. And for those that are listening, to put that into perspective, 1 million vertical meters is climbing, I think it's 2.5 times the height of the International Space Station. It's a monster amount of elevation. And to do it, I was doing essentially 30 hours a week on the bike, just going up and down hills. So I set myself this goal of it's a year-long challenge. And you got to imagine, when you begin that challenge and you do the first week, you realize how hard it's going to be. You suddenly feel like you're a very, very long way down a very deep, dark hole, and you're not going to climb out of it for another 51 weeks. So I was battling this for that entire year, but it probably came to a real head around the halfway point when I basically realized how fucked I was, and yet I was only at just halfway. And my numbers, so I use an app where we monitor my sort of training peaks, so I can monitor my fitness, but also my fatigue, and my coach is in there looking at all of the data. We realized that I was actually not very healthy. I was just super fatigued. Go figure. And we basically made a tough call to to take a complete week off the bike and rest, which meant starting the second half of this challenge, I was already a week behind, and I already knew like how difficult that first half had been. So the sensation is like you're in this deep dark hole and you kind of can't see the light. And I've developed some coping mechanisms over the year that help me to get through that. And maybe that's something interesting we can touch on that the listeners could perhaps apply to their own lives. So I'm not very good at maths, but for some reason there's always numbers going around my mind, and perhaps that's the ADHD, something going on with that. But I tend to find it quite helpful to break things up into percentages. So while I might say, look, it was really hard because I was only 50% through and I still had 50% to go, I could also say, look, I've done this many hours on the bike this week. Let's simplify it a bit. Next week, I've just got to do this. So breaking it down into manageable chunks. So it just helps to kind of put it into perspective in your own mind, the percentage of, as opposed to thinking of it as a whole year, let's break it down. Let's make it into a manageable goal. Yeah. I break it down into 50%, and then I break it down into, 20%, 10%, 5%, and I just concentrate on the 5% that I can manage that day, or the 2% that I can manage that day. Because at the end of the day, once that 2%'s gone, that's another 2% off the list, and I'm working on what's left. So I break things down into manageable chunks, and I do that in my daily life as well. Like if I've got 10 things to do in a day, I make a list of all the things that I've got to do, and I physically go through the list and I cross them off as I've done it. For me, that's almost it's a very visual way of saying, oh, that's something done and I've got less to do. Mm. That's my way of dealing with these things, putting it into perspective, making it into a manageable chunk. And it works. And it's kind of like a mind game. I know that, it's still the same amount of work that I've got to do, but by applying a percentage or applying a smaller goal to it, it feels more manageable at the time.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's all you've got to do. Just get through that next little bit.
Exactly, yeah. It breaks it by breaking it down into smaller chunks, manageable kind of tasks that you can do. I had a guest on the podcast earlier on. She's also world record. She sets herself these huge challenges. She's called Monica Sattler.
Okay.
And he said as well, think big, act small. So set yourself these big challenges, but then break it down into smaller chunks that you can achieve on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Well, kind of, it's interesting because you would think when you are, as you said, midway through the year into 2022, through climbing all these 1 million vertical meters over a period of year to raise money for mental health charities, 3 mental health charities during that year. It's easy to imagine that you would feel very easily overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge, by the sheer number of hours that you had to spend on the bike.
Yeah.
Was there someone, or is there a team of people that you relied to, like as a support network, to get you through and to help you overcome? Because what we see is you riding the bike, you overcoming these monsters of a challenge, but behind you there must be a team of people that kind of works with you to support you.
Yeah.
How important is this kind of support network?
I couldn't do it without the support network. So while I'm the one riding the bike, like a lot of the hard work's been done behind the scenes. So whether that's my wife, who's just supporting emotionally and, there for me when I'm having a down moment, there to, just general lifesaver. I've got doctor, I've got a physio, I've got an osteopath, there's a nutritionist, there's a coach. but I'd also count like everyone around me that just supports, or like the people on YouTube or Instagram that send me a message. Like that's part of the team that makes it happen. And I find like I get a lot of inspiration from people who reach out and share a comment, or that sort of hits me quite hard because it's like, oh, what I'm doing is actually having an impact. So yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely not a solo sport. While I'm the one on the bike, anyone could get on a bike and do it, let's be honest. It's the people behind that sort of manage, like, how do I not get sick for a whole year? Or how do I not have one injury for a whole year? Like, how do we manage that? And that's like a complex
Exactly,
game.
yeah.
I feel sorry for my wife because she, like, that whole year was almost put on hold in a sense that, like, I didn't have energy for anything. Like, going for a coffee was like, that was a once a week ordeal on a Sunday when I had a rest day, when I was generally like super grumpy. Like I would have been an absolute pain to live with.
Yeah.
And I've said like I'm never doing a year-long challenge again. And what's kind of bad is that I've had these thoughts of other things, and I'm like, oh, that'd be that. Then I'm sort of like, no, you can't do it. You can't put anyone through that.
Yeah, it's well, I had the pleasure of riding with you when you came to London in 2022 to do as part of this challenge that we are speaking about. Like you had to do one Everesting challenge, which for the people that don't know what it is, you have to climb the height of the Everest in one go, which is over 8,000 meters of climbing. I don't know the exact figure.
Yeah.
But whilst I was riding with you in London, you were very easy to talk, personable, kind of easygoing kind of guy. But I can imagine that, and I can relate to that. If you have a goal and you are kind of very narrow-minded about, this is the goal that I need to achieve, and I'm setting these smaller objectives so that I can get to that goal. I can imagine that kind of life starts falling by the wayside because the goal is kind of the priority. So it's kind of important that as well, I guess, to acknowledge that the support network is so important.
Super
and
important.
Sometimes it's through these challenges can be easy to just perhaps neglect.
Yeah, for sure. And like I've got super fond memories like of that year, like almost when I think back, like the most fond memories I have are when I went and did an Everest, and be it the one in London that we did, be it I did a couple in the US, and I did more than a couple here as well. But my favorite sort of memories were the ones where like other people came out and I was riding with them and we were suffering together and we were talking, because the time just disappears, like once you get in a bit of a chat and you're going back and forth, you sort of forget about what you're going through. And I think that's a bit of a metaphor, or we can apply that to life as well, because, be it a difficult period at work or like a relationship breakdown, having the the buddies around you to talk to about it makes a massive difference. And I like the saying, like, a problem shared is a problem halved. And I really feel like that's the truth. Once you can talk to someone about something, you feel like you've got a weight off your chest.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. You mentioned about the coping mechanisms through that you have kind of identified to overcome these challenges. So how do you see these coping mechanisms and these experiences through the challenges as a kind of perhaps a blueprint that you can share with people to inspire them, to help them overcome their own struggles or overcome objectives that set themselves to?
Yeah.
Is there a way that kind of a structure that you identified that works for you, but you think can also work for other people?
I think that there's two things that I think will be easy for people to apply. So I'll run through two of them. So the
Okay.
first one was it's a quote, and and the quote is, by by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. If you go into something prepared for it, both physically and mentally, whether it's doing some public speaking, whether it's having to talk to a bunch of people at work, whether it's training for a marathon, like
Yeah.
everything that happens beforehand is more important than the actual event. And so by failing to do all the stuff in the lead up, for me, it was going to the shops and buying the food and working out how much I had to eat every hour, and having the food at home for when I finished, and knowing that tomorrow I'm going to have to book the bike in to get the service, otherwise I'm not going to be able to. All of that sort of preparation work is more important than the actual event, because if you don't do that, you don't get to the event.
Yeah.
And on that same topic, I think actually learning to enjoy all of that stuff is really important as well. And that's something I'm still working on. I get so fixated on a goal that that's all I think about. And sometimes I forget to enjoy the process along the way. And I'm actually chatting with a psychologist about that at the moment, around, how do I actually enjoy that process more, so it's not just about winning or setting a record, it's about getting to the point where you're ready to go and set the record. That's the big win. So that's one bit of advice I could give. The second bit of advice, and I've sort of come up with this term, it's like sensory deprivation. So I want you to imagine there's an album that you love. So be it, I don't know, Rolling Stones, be it James Blunt, be it Katy Perry, whoever it may be. I'm not going to judge you. Whatever it is, I'm not going to judge. Lady Gaga. What I find is that by starving myself, well, first I'll say, when I listen to certain albums, I feel like inspired, or I might feel like I really want to exercise, or I might feel like motivated, or I push hard. But if you listen to that album over and over and over and over again, that effect wears off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what I've found is, going into an event, I starve myself from listening to certain music, and I've got certain playlists on my phone, and they're like the motivation playlists. So I don't listen to them for a couple of weeks before I go. And then what I do is I use them as a reward. So again, like we were saying, you've got your goal, 100% of the goal. Once I get to 20% of the goal, so that might be 100 kilometers in, my first reward is I'm going to listen to one of those albums. I'm going to listen to the album from start to finish, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to wait another 100 kilometers, and then I'm going to choose another album as my reward. And it doesn't necessarily have to be music, but it's that sense of earning a reward. And for me, the reward is music. And it can be whatever you want. It might be, you get to go for a swim at the beach once you've done your gym session, or something, Yeah,
exactly, yeah.
Your reward can be whatever your reward is.
Yeah, anything you choose. Interesting that kind of, again, coming back to the mechanism of breaking down the goals into smaller chunks, into achievable daily tasks. It's kind of in the same way you're setting in the kind of the longer challenges, the bigger challenges, that kind of allows you to just look forward to it, because by depriving yourself of, you are kind of building up excitement, building up kind of the momentum for it.
I'll even do that on a training ride, for example. If I've got a long training ride, like this morning I was out for 6 hours, but I don't listen to any music for the first half, because then I know once I've got over the halfway point, that's my reward. Then I'm going to listen to music for the final 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I played with this like I know it's a mind game, but it works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're trying it. Yeah. It's a great way, because it's kind of for me, kind of, I like that kind of
Yeah,
gamification of it, because it allows you to place tricks on your mind
for
and
sure.
just make those long rides, work objectives seem more achievable, because you are creating rewards, you are creating kind of a game that allows you to make it more pleasurable, perhaps.
Yeah. And there's so many ways you can do it as well. Like sometimes if I've got a 4-hour ride, I'll get up and ride 2 hours super early so that the final 2 hours I can ride with a mate. And I know that the final 2 hours, then I'm with someone. And it's like, I'll get out of bed
That's a good
early so
one.
I ride alone in the dark. So then I can ride home with someone because that's a reward.
That's a good one. I might try that one. um, I wanted to shift gears. There's an intricate aspect of what you do in setting all these world records, these enormous challenges, which is kind of the business side of ultra cycling. Because as we touched upon earlier on about the support network and the immense value that it brings to you, I wanted to kind of help us understand a bit what goes into the logistics of planning and funding these cycling challenges. You
Yeah.
have said you are a professional ultra cyclist, and I wanted to try and to understand a bit more about what that means.
So
But yeah,
basically, I generate my income through working with different brands as an athlete. So, a sponsorship model. Where I like to think that I differ is that one thing my degree in construction management taught me was how a contract works. And you give something and you get something in return. And I think this is a very simple principle that's often people don't understand in the sport world. They expect to be given something, but they don't give anything back in return. And so I've got a series of great sponsors that have supported me over a number of years, support the projects that I do, and this allows me to sustain myself financially. But I also understand that for whatever they're giving me, I'm going to ensure that I'm giving them at least double in return because I
yeah.
understand the power of a contract.
Sorry, I was going to add to that as well, because it's so important to frame what you just said, because you is not just an exchange. You are putting more value into the world. You is not just you give me that, I'll give you this in return. You're adding more value through the challenges, to the awareness you're raising, to the visibility of the brands, and that in turns helps you build kind of a personality that can extends beyond just the ultra cycling space, goes beyond cycling media and into the
Yeah,
mainstream media, because that's what you're
yeah,
trying to do, is to get to the mainstream media, to raise awareness for mental health, and to showcasing through your own personal struggles, through your own journey of transformation,
yeah,
how sport can change lives for the better.
for sure. And like, obviously, the articles in the cycling meter are fantastic, and like every article online is fantastic. But like you just touched on, like my goal is, yeah, there's the cycling media. I want to get in the cycling media. But my real goal is like, how do I get in the New York Times, or how do I get in the Wall Street Journal? Because then there's thousands and thousands of people seeing what I'm doing, not
Yeah.
because of the cycling, but because of the mental health component of the
Mm-hmm.
storyline that's related to the cycling. And I think this is where there's value as well for a brand, because by getting in a New York Times or a Wall Street Journal, it's not about touching existing cycling fans. We're potentially getting more people on bikes, more people riding bikes because of the impact that a bike can have on the mental health. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really important space to be striving towards, not just the low-hanging fruit of the people that are already riding bikes.
Yeah. And if I wanted to ask a question, then because it's a more obviously you are perhaps, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are now in a position where you are established in the space of cycling. Now, when you're looking for brands to work with you and for you to work with them, do you see the brands aligning with your values, and how does this kind of partnership works for you?
The first thing going into like even approaching a brand is I've got to believe in the product. I'm not somebody that's gonna use something or wear something because somebody's paying me if I don't actually believe in it. So before I'll make contact or before I'll consider anything, it's got to be something that I'm actually genuinely interested in. When there's a product that I'm interested in and I feel like there's an opportunity for us to work together, I also then do a bit of due diligence, like what is that brand's goal? What is that brand striving to achieve? What are they wanting to do? And do I align with that? Mm-hmm. If it's a company that's promoting something that I don't believe in, as far as like their company values, I'm not going to go jump into bed with them. But if it's a brand that does align with my values, which is getting more people on bikes, showcasing the power of bikes on our mental health, and trying to promote adventure in a sense of like pushing yourself outside of your comfort zones. If a brand ticks those boxes, I'm going to approach them and I'm going to say to them, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. If you're interested in this, that's great. But if you're not, I also understand, and that's also great. And we don't have to do anything. Like, I'm not like, over the years, the brands that I've worked with have changed. One of the things I've always been conscious of is I don't want to change unless I have to change. One, because I want to build a long-term relationship with the people that I'm working with. And two, because it doesn't look good if you're changing brands year after year and just chasing the cash. Sure, the financial component's important, but I'd prefer to build a long-term relationship with someone and build that financial component through years of trust and through years of showcasing what's possible and showing the hard work that you put in. Like, for me, it's all about a long-term relationship, and I think that's reflective in the brands that I'm working with now, the Specialized that I've been with for 4 or 5 years. Like, I also like, if I've got a good connection with the people at the brand, that's also massive as well, because they're essentially your employee and they're the people that you're dealing with, every week, every month. I want them to be like friends. I want them to feel like they can trust me and I can trust them. And it's like, it's all about the relationship. And I feel super fortunate to have, the Specialized, the Goo, the Camelback, the Oakley, the Steady Rack, these brands that are supporting me, because like the other week, I had a guy from a brand, Goo, come over from the US and we spent a couple of days together as mates, not as like work employee athlete. It was like as a mate. And for me, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, building the personal connections. It goes beyond the business relationships.
Sure.
That's what connects people together. And as you said, build these long-term connections, relationships that bring more value to kind of a partnership, because that's in the long term. Then through these partnerships, you become part of their journey, and they become as well identified and part of your journey. So it works both ways, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, that's like the value of like a contract. Like, if it's a one-sided contract, get out of it. It's not worth being in. Like, it's got to be something that goes both ways.
Yeah, definitely. Also, there's an aspect that we kind of have not touched yet, which is we have touched about the community aspect. You mentioned about receiving messages on social media from people that felt inspired from partners that have told you about how impactful your work has been to their loved ones, and that is very important because it fuels kind of your drive. And I wanted to touch on that because it's such an important aspect of raising awareness for mental health, because the aspect of community, it's so difficult to achieve, because it's not just, it's again coming back to the contractual relationship. It's not about I give you this, you get me that. It's more about putting more into the world than you are taking back from it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch about this community engagement, because this plays a big part in the work you do. How do you engage with the communities? How do you see kind of the role that you have in completing these challenges, in setting yourself these mind-boggling accomplishments, and then how you do break it down into like digestible chunks, so that people like me, that I don't have any experience ultra cycling, but I like to listen to what you have to say because it resonates with me.
Thanks.
So how do you sort of engage with the communities that you are creating through the work you are building and the connections you are making with people?
I think the simple answer is, like, at the end of the day, like, I'm just like any other human on earth. Like, I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need people around me, you know. And I try to showcase that, like, not just online, but like, I'll wave to every single person I ride past, whether or not they're a cyclist or a commuter or, you know, somebody going to work. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just friendly, you know, like I try not to put any barriers up. I try not to look at myself as being any better than anybody else. At the end of the day, we're all going through the same struggles. And I think perhaps what resonates with people is the fact that you can message me and I'll reply within, you know, when I next look at my phone. And like, I'd like to think that I'm just accessible, and that people perhaps look at me as just normal, and perhaps that then becomes relatable, which then is, you know, wow, he's just like me, or he's just like, you know, little Johnny over there. And you know, that means that I could do that as well. And yeah, absolutely, you could. Like, anyone could go and do what I'm doing. And that's the sort of message, or that's the, yeah, I guess the key messaging of my brand, if you want to call it that, is like, I'm just a normal human, and I'm open to talk, and I'm open to, you know, accept if I've done something wrong, and I'm accessible. And I think as far as community building goes, perhaps I'm not the best in the world. I'm okay at it. But I think the key to building a community is not trying to create something that's fake. It's actually just being. And if that generates a community, then fantastic.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's just, the community grows organically. If you force it, you're not creating a community. But what I mean is that it grows organically. You have to create the right message, the right space for people to listen to and to interact with you, and then it will grow from that.
I think as well, like, one of the, without being negative, one of the problems with cycling is I feel and I see like there's a lot of ego involved, be it around like how you look on a bike, or what clothing you're wearing, or the bike you're on, or the speed that you're riding. It's like, let's forget about the ego side of it and let's just connect to the fact that we're all just out on a bike, doing it for fitness, doing it because we enjoy being out in the sun. When I see that groups that don't wave back, and I'm like, I don't get angry. I just kind of question, like, what is going on inside your head that somebody's waved at you and you've not waved back at them? Like, where do you sort of see yourself as a better person? Like, that's the problem with cycling at the moment, in my eyes. And I'd love to see that
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, well, it starts with individuals like you being the role model, so that people looking up to you, seeing on the road, not knowing who you are, and seeing what you do, that it creates a little ripple effect in the world, and that kind of almost like a butterfly effect.
Yeah.
It starts multiplying and expanding. But yeah, it has to start with small gestures, with people like you or me, just being nice, friendly to people.
Yeah, like we're all, at the end of the day, we're all human. Like, we all need food, we all need sleep, we all go through ups and downs. Like, we're all the same. No one is better than anyone else.
Precisely. You have been talking a lot about the ultra cycling challenges, what they mean to you, how do you motivate to achieve them, how do you inspire other people to do it as well, to take upon themselves and to set themselves goals that they wouldn't think that would be possible to do. For someone that kind of who is inspired by your journey, but doesn't not know how to start, how to set a goal, or whether that is getting on a bike, learning how to ride a bike, completing their first 100 miles, or going on a week-long adventure, what would advice would you give them, and to kind of to set themselves in the right mindset to complete these whatever they set their minds to?
I think the starting small, so like keeping it manageable. And it's often very easy to pick that crazy aspirational goal. And that's fine. I call that, like, that's the dream, right?
Yeah.
But to get to the dream, you need the small goals along the way. So if your goal is that riding the 100 miles, you're not going to do that next week. But you can put in a practice or a process that allows you to do it in 2 months' time or in a month's time. So perhaps the first week, your goal is, again, breaking it down. Smaller challenges that are easy to achieve, that give you the confidence to then go and attack the next one. And actually, like we said, like enjoying the process along the way. Sure, you're not doing the 100-mile today, but in 4 weeks' time, you're going to do it. And in the meantime, you're going to have done 3 great rides, probably with a bunch of mates that you've connected with on a different level. And then you're going to go and do 100. Like, yeah, I think it's just like starting small and not getting too carried away that it's got to be massive or, super arduous from the beginning. Because I think if it doesn't go to plan, then maybe you'll never attempt at doing it again and you'll be burnt by the whole process. And keep it fun, like keep it exciting along the way too.
Yeah, that's very good advice, because it allows people to dream big, have aspirational objectives that they wouldn't see themselves to be able to do it next day. But if they create the structure, a plan, they break it down, they can do it in 4 weeks or whatever time that is. So it allows them to go on a journey and then be able to see that progression curve go up as well.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you this question as well, because it's topical on the podcast, and I think is very relevant to the conversation we've been having, which is, what does success look like to you?
It's a good question, and that's something I'm kind of working on. I'm like, because when I look at myself, I look at myself as I'm Jack the cyclist, and I'm trying to look beyond that, not because I'm wanting to retire or anything, but I see that, like, well, I know that while I love cycling, that's only one component of my life, and there's a whole other component of my life: my wife, my dog, my family, the fact that I love surfing, like all these different things. So it's something I'm working on. But as far as like life success goes, it's almost like having the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it. So that idea of not being constrained by having to be somewhere at a certain time or having to do something at a certain, it's like having the freedom. For me, like success for me is freedom.
Yeah.
Put simply, now that I'm thinking about it, like success is freedom. Being able to do what I want to do when I want to do it. Because we only get one shot at life.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so small.
Indeed, yeah. If you snap your fingers, it's gone. It's the power of choice. You have kind of you choose what you want to do, and that can be freedom as well. You're just choosing whether you want to go on that ride or pursue a goal. Is choosing, having the choice gives you perhaps freedom. But that's my take on what kind of a riff off on what you said.
Yeah.
But I like what I said, and I think is important as well what you said.
And I've always struggled, like when I feel constrained, be it like too many things to do, or at school when it was sitting in a classroom, that didn't suit me. And so I think I've spent my whole life since then trying not to do that.
Yeah.
And so now I almost define that as success if I can do that.
Very good. So kind of this brings us to a close. There's one last question, which is a tradition I started on the podcast, which is every guest leaves a question to my next guest, not knowing who they are. So the question that was left for you is the following. If you can change the world for the better, what would you start with?
That is a very open-ended. It's a good question. Yeah, I've got to just. So if I could, what would I start with? Probably like the notion of acceptance, like accepting other people for what they are or who they are. And I'm not necessarily talking about religion or who you vote for or, whether you like your hair long or short. It's like just in general, like accepting that we're all a little bit different and that's okay. And not having to conform to a certain social norm. I think if everybody could do that, then I say that would be a pretty good start. We'd be in a pretty good place pretty good position to start making some change.
Yeah.
But what would I know? I'm an ultra cyclist.
Well, I mean, it's very wise, because it's being able to accept other people. It's a principle of being able to live within a society without harming each other,
without
or
conflict,
entering wars every other minute. Is being able to accept who you are, accept what someone else is or trying to do, and see themselves for what it is. I think this is a very powerful message, because it's in it there is so much that you can unpack, in the sense that we are all different. We all have our own oddities, our own objectives, and we're just talking about personalities, but there is so much other differences. But seeing another person for what they are, it brings us closer together, I think.
Now that I'm thinking as well, it'd either be that or removing people's ego and replacing it with the essence. That's something my wife's a psychologist, and she often says that we need to connect with the essence, not with the ego. And if we can connect with the essence, then we're far better off. And so I think the ego gets in the way of, and that comes back to the acceptance again.
Yeah. Well, that is food for thought. That's food for thought. People listening to just unpack that, because it's just the ego is probably the facade that you put up, kind of the walls around you, so that perhaps you feel protected.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting kind of concept to think about, because I think it relates a lot to the work you have been doing, the challenge that you have been accomplishing, and the advocacy that towards mental health that you have been working on, because it just kind of brings people to the essence of what it means to be at peace with yourself, and and as well with other people around you. I think that's my take.
Yeah. Nah, I like it.
So now is your turn to put someone else on the spot. What question would you like to leave to my next guest?
I'm going to do something a bit different as far as a question goes. I'm going to make it more specific.
Sure.
So if you could change 2 character traits about yourself, what would they be?
Brilliant question. Brilliant question. Thanks, Jack. It's been a pleasure. Where can people find you, learn more about you, follow you?
The best place is Instagram, so Jack Ultra Cyclist, or on YouTube, again, Jack Ultra Cyclist. I'm endeavoring to put out weekly videos on YouTube, so there'll be more content up there, but there's enough there now to get you started if you want to do a bit of a deep dive.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there is a lot more that we could be talking, but it's a kind of, it gives people listening a snapshot into the transformation you have been on, and allows people to, if they come to your channels, to get to know you a bit more. Yeah, so thanks for your time and for sharing your journey with us.
No, thanks for inviting me on and allowing me to chat about it.
Wow, what an amazing conversation. Jack's journey through the realm of ultra cycling is more than just a series of races or challenges. It is really a testament to the power of the human spirit, overcoming challenges, overcoming the darkness of addiction to where he is now today. And I feel inspired listening to his story because it resonates with me and also resonates with the cycling community and beyond. I hope you feel inspired as well by his story. Now, before you go, please remember to follow and subscribe and leave us a review, because it helps me grow the podcast massively, and I'll be forever grateful. Also, remember to tune in to next week's podcast, where Jack's question will be answered by my next guest. Until then, thanks for listening.